Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the American Academy. My name is R.J. McGill. I'm the head of our communications department here and the editor of our Berlin Journal. You were all here, as you all know, for Heidi Julewitz's lecture, Altitude Sickness. Heidi is our Mary Ellen von der Heyden Fellow in Letters this semester. I will just say a few brief words about Mary Ellen and about Heidi, and then turn it over to the main act. The Mary Ellen von der Heyden Fellowship in Letters was established in 2007 with the purpose of bringing outstanding novelists and fiction writers to Berlin as part of the American Academy's residential fellowship program. The fellowship was endowed in perpetuity in 2009. It was initiated by Karl von der Heyden, a native Berliner, founding trustee of the American Academy, its treasurer for over a decade, and the Academy's co-chairman from 2009 to 2011. Karl and Mary Ellen have long been committed to philanthropy, funding a library, an art center, and fellowships at their alma mater, Duke University, in addition to significant endowments elsewhere, most prominently at the New York Public Library's Coleman Center for Scholars and Writers. The American Academy's Mary Ellen von der Heyden Fellowship recognizes her lifelong passion for fiction and has made possible the residencies of writers including Nathan Englander, Rivka Galchen, Yaa Gyasi, Jonathan Lethem, Karen Russell, and of course Ben Marcus, and now Heidi, about whom I will say a few words without embarrassing her too much. It's always awkward, Heidi, to be the recipient of these. Heidi Julewitz is an associate professor at Columbia University's School of the Arts. She received her BA from Dartmouth College and MFA from Columbia University. She is also, importantly, from Maine, in case no one knew. Heidi's the author most recently of Directions to Myself, a memoir of motherhood and midlife and manhood. And before that, The Folded Clock, a diary, which began as a journal of wide-ranging reflections about quotidian life and organized by their emotional tenor that was written in part in the library right over there. Years ago, we were fortunate enough, this is a little PR for us, we were fortunate to publish Heidi when she wasn't a fellow, but her husband was, in the Berlin Journal. And shortly after that, outtakes from The Folded Clock in a little magazine called P98 Paper here in Berlin. In case it's not clear, Heidi, we are your fanboys. Heidi's novel, The Vanishers, was the winner of the PEN New England Fiction Award, and her breakthrough novel, The Mineral Palace, which made big waves in the 90s publishing world, was the finalist for the Young Lions Literary Award, among many other accolades. Heidi's the co-editor with Sheila Heti and Leanne Shapton of the best-selling Women in Clothes. Her short fiction and essays have appeared in Esquire, The New Yorker, New York Times Magazine, Harper's, Sweeney's, and the New York Magazine, among others, and have been anthologized in Best American Short Stories and Best American Travel Essays, among others. And finally, Heidi, for all of us who are growing up in the 90s at least a little bit, Heidi's the founding editor with Vindala Vida and Ed Park of the literary magazine The Believer 21 years ago. It's really shocking. A 5-time finalist for the National Magazine Award, and for those of us who were into such things, one of the most exciting things to happen in 2003. At the Academy, Heidi's working on a book called Altitude Sickness, which she'll tell you about in about 8 seconds. Her presentation will last about 30 minutes. She's being very draconian tonight about this being 1 hour long. And then she and I will go onto the stage for a Q&A, and then you can also ask questions. And so, Heidi, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I was expecting to say something a little more extravagant, because I'm not embarrassed at all. Okay, yeah, so literally an hour from when you started talking.
That's even less time.
Yeah, no, this is going to be quick and dirty, everyone. We are going to be having cake very soon. I also want to thank Mary Ellen von der Heyden for letting me be here. And I want to also extend my gratitude to everyone who is in this room, the people who make the Academy run, the other fellows, the new people I've been seated next to at dinners, the people I know and have met in Berlin, not only for giving me support in the form of time, space, food, shelter, and company, but also for influencing me regularly and deeply. My project's path and shape has already been altered to reflect the casual and serious encounters I've had with the people I've met in and through the Academy. So RJ already blew the surprise. This is my second time at the Academy. And as a partner 10 years ago, I did write this other book in this library, an unfunded project, not funded by the Academy. And it was called a diary, and RJ, you already sort of said this, but it was more about discovering the infinite thought tunnels hidden beneath the sometimes deadening surface of daily life. And so, for example, one of the sections was about the Academy's automated lawnmowers, which my children and I named Greta and Fritz on one of the many days they mysteriously did not have school again. And it became a way to talk about gender discrimination in the American workplace. But a key aspect to this methodology, which I will be deploying more broadly in this new book, I best access my ideas through interactions with other beings, not limited to people, appliances, ghosts, and email autoresponses. As such, I have many, many unwitting collaborators, and so this is a long way of thanking in advance all of you, my unwitting collaborators. But given I'm still very much in the discovery stages of this project, I thought instead of faking an authority that I do not currently have, that I'd bring you into my workspace and show you what's on my desk, and talk about the various distinct GPS points I'm working with as I try to fill in the landscape of this book. And one of those points since January has been the artist Onkwara on the left. This is from I Got Up, which a series he did from 1968 to 1979, and he sent 2 tourist postcards a day to various friends and business acquaintances. And so, inspired by him, I've been making maps of my movements every day since I arrived, and the idea was I was going to send these every day to my children so that they'd know what I was doing here, but I haven't sent a single postcard yet to them. But I think because they've proven to be unexpectedly valuable to me as I attempt to piece together the landscape here that I'm in, and likewise the various puzzle pieces of the book I'm writing. And finally, I hope this doesn't sound like a cop-out, but on this theoretical tour of what's on my desk, I'm going to try to provide a sense of what's driving me without being too precise or certain about the connections. If I solve these mysteries in advance, I will no longer be interested enough to write a book about them. Okay. So during the Fellows presentation in January, I mentioned how in 2014, I was searching for a brown sweater on eBay, and while doing so, I found a person selling the estate of a not terribly famous French actress. And this discovery fascinated me for 3 reasons. One, I became interested in how this brown sweater seemed more valuable than other brown sweaters on eBay because it came with a story. 2, but what was that story? There wasn't a ton of biographical information about the actress, so it was only via her belongings that I could learn about her life. The person selling the estate would carefully feed out the estate items, and it became like reading a serialized novel. I'd go on eBay every few days to receive the next installment, and I started to buy a lot of the actress's things. I kept asking myself, why was I so compelled, not just to buy her things, but to try to keep her belongings together? I was witnessing her second death, or the final material dissipation of her life, and this moved me very much. And so my collecting her things was somewhat of a preventative measure against her total extinction. And because I love my material possessions very much, it was by extension a bid against my eventual extinction too. So I tried to get in touch with the seller, but they wouldn't write me back. And meanwhile, I mostly purchased things that I would wear, but I also purchased things that I felt should remain with the estate I was amassing. Along with the story I'd started to write for this woman, and for no particularly good reason, I decided she died alone and had no children, and somehow an estate dealer to whom she meant nothing had come by her belongings. And then this item came up for sale. Inside of this package is her pregnancy dress. I have never opened this package and may never open this package. This is, I guess, a concrete example of how some things need to remain unknown so that I can remain curious about them. When I said earlier I love my possessions very much, here is what I meant. I am not a compulsive materialist, but I do, even as a full-grown adult, still believe that inanimate objects have feelings. I recently read a book called Stillborn by Guadalupe Nettle about a birth gone wrong, and this line about the belongings bought for a baby who will never use them really arrested me. And so I felt protective toward the actress's belongings as well as the actress. But at what point did her belongings become my belongings? When was my act of protection an act of kidnapping and erasure? And at what point was her estate going to become my estate? This worried me enough that I established some rules. So these are her hand mirrors, and I have been very, very careful never to allow my face to appear in them. I want her face to have been the last face in these mirrors. And this assumes that the seller, whoever they were, hadn't looked at themselves in these mirrors for hours and hours as they counted my money. And yet, there is no denying that I was, and currently am, taking public ownership of her things. In some cases, I am ruining them. The sweaters have holes, I've torn her dresses. Some items, like a set of knife rests, I've entirely lost. Her belongings might not survive me. And she might not survive me. I am, at this very moment, erasing or overriding her. For example, this talk is being recorded, and I am wearing her sweater. And here is a recording of her wearing her sweater.
Écoutez, en tout cas, je crois que le résultat est assez brillant. D'ailleurs, le résultat, le voici. Isabelle Corret, bonjour. Puisque personne encore ne vous a vu, permettez-nous tout d'abord de vous regarder. Alors ne bougez plus et souriez. Merci. Vous avez entendu tout à l'heure ce que Jean-Pierre Melville a dit de la façon dont il vous a découverte. Est-ce que c'est exact?
Tout est exact.
Ce n'est pas un truc publicitaire?
Pas du tout.
Alors c'est merveilleux. Vous avez dû être très étonné lorsque vous avez vu quelqu'un qui vous abordait pour vous poser la question classique, voulez-vous faire du cinéma? Qu'est-ce que vous avez pensé?
Mais j'ai d'abord pensé que c'était une blague et puis j'ai bien vu que c'était pas ça du tout.
Et est-ce qu'à ce moment-là, vous aviez l'intention d'être...
So the man who was in the sunglasses, that is Jean-Paul Melville, and he was the director of the first film she starred in, which was called Bob le Flambeur, and it was made in 1956. And if you speak French, the complication of her being objectified while wearing this object that I've basically personified will not be lost on you. So all of my attempts to contact the seller failed. And so I started to buy the more expensive items for sale, including some studio photographs, thinking that I could basically bribe the seller by being an exemplary buyer to contact me. And finally, I got a response, and the seller was the actress's daughter. She is the person who, I guess, in one way or another, wore that pregnancy dress. And she ran an eBay store that sold vintage clothing. And while she loved her mother, she had no emotional attachment to her mother's belongings. The value they had for her was the value of what they were worth in the eBay marketplace. And I found this less a stance to judge. I also use my family members for my business. Those are my glasses. And they are in my books. And as you'll soon see, my promotional materials. I saw this actually as more a thing to admire. And the daughter started to offer to sell me things such as her mother's personal photos and press clippings. And we developed a more intimate transactional relationship. She even shared with me things I could not presumably afford to buy, like her mother's house. And I started to think even more about the eventual fate of my objects and how they would represent a material burden to someone, likely my children. Because your belongings, when you are gone, can be a terrible weight on those who survive you. Which then made me not want to get rid of my objects to spare my children this burden, but to add value to the many valueless objects I owned. I would give them a story, and that would either make them more valuable to my children or to someone else. I was thinking less of my legacy than of theirs, the objects. But I was also thinking about junk and creative uses of other people's junk and about consumer mistakes, which had become my consumer mistakes, which I was trying for all of us to rectify. So what follows is also a response to a consumer need. I needed to sell my last book when it was published in June, and I really didn't feel like going on a book tour. And I didn't want to be in public. And so I decided instead to promote my book by making videos. And I pretended I was doing my book tour in a tiny boat. And the video I'm about to show is from the end of the summer. And prior to this, I made videos about how to board a boat. And then I responded to a question I received from my audience. And this led to focusing on the topic of female worry. And I think it's probably worth mentioning how, before you see this video, that playing and goofing around has become really important to my figuring stuff out. Maybe because my kids are grown and I have no one to play games with anymore but myself. But it's through these quick, loose, and often silly experiments that I eventually stumble upon something more formally cohesive and serious. So my rule was I could not buy anything. The narratives would be formed by what I had in my closet, in my barn, these yard sale objects that were already used, and I had bought them, but I had not yet used them myself. And I also used the people around me. Here I'm using myself and my daughter and my mother.
My first appearance in a major newspaper as a child worry star.
Heidi Julavitz, too, didn't exactly appreciate the noise made by fire engine sirens in
Caption just seemed a little
Yarmouth's Slam Festival parade.
suspicious to me.
Even her dog, Schultz's apparent calmness, couldn't prevent her tears.
For starters, I never cried as a kid.
No. Well, no, you didn't cry. Well,
I see someone thinking critically about what is clearly an absurd tradition.
your father went in and said, okay, there's no pin sticking in her.
4th of July parades always have a lot of really loud, around 110 fire engines as a part of them, to 120 decibels. Nobody likes that, which can cause hearing damage.
She's breathing.
I mean, the real question is, why isn't everyone crying?
There's no animal in the crib.
Why isn't the cowboy crying? What does any of this have to do with clams?
Most everybody enjoyed the parade.
This is just another example of a female being pointlessly emotional
She's okay. Let her cry.
because everybody else is having fun.
So no, she's never cried again.
So, oh, don't worry, there's more. Okay, so this brings me to why Berlin. Dan, the director, asked me this question, and I don't feel like I answered it very well, so I'm going to here. So this is my lock screen, and behind it is a piece by Agnes Martin called Words from 1961. And this has been my lock screen since 2016. And so in visual terms, I think it speaks to my preoccupation with erasure and override because of these layers, that from above, each one would be invisible, but from the side, you can see everything. And this is a description of words from the Christie's catalog when the work came up for auction in 2018. Executed in 1961, Words is an exquisite work dating from a pivotal moment in Agnes Martin's early career. With its cruciform arrangement of triangles set against a plane of quivering horizontal lines, it bears witness to the encroaching logic of the grid as an organizational principle in her art, and to the early influence of landscape upon her aesthetic. So, the first reason that I am in Berlin is that being here is a form of override or potential erasure of the last time I was here. Every minute I'm here, it's like I'm recording over the CCTV tape of my family's time in Berlin 10 years ago. And why I'm attracted to this is confusing to me. And I'm wondering how, in generative terms, to process that attraction, and how, too, might burial be reconfigured as a form of structural support. I also take a lot of screenshots of my lock screen, so it's like the diary I'm not keeping. So it's Agnes Martin layered with my receipts and my life detritus in the form of fleeting alerts. And it is, to some degree, my written archive. So this is a map by Agnes Martin. It's the directions to her house in New Mexico. And it says, "Dear Jack, I thought I had better send you a map and bring ice, Agnes." And this relates to another concern, and I'm going to ask someone after this talk to bring ice, Heidi. This relates to another concern or question that's arisen during these 10 years of buying the actress's estate: how my material archive is more and more limited to objects, that physical correspondence or actual receipts and shopping lists and other forms of telling trash are no longer being generated. But also, returning to my return to Berlin, to this villa, how are humans recording and recorded in a landscape? So very quickly, I'm going to run through 3 slides here. I've been writing actual journalistic-ish pieces in the past 5 years that were basically research around this topic. So in 2019, I went on an avalanche survival course, and this publication, The Snowy Torrents, it analyzes avalanche accidents and how people change or otherwise impact the landscape, because most avalanches are caused by humans and as a result are sometimes swallowed by it. This is from the 2021 eruption in Iceland. Much to say about this, but for the moment, the layers beneath are emerging from the earth and covering the previous layer. And this is layering that's more like a renewable cycle rather than a sequence of erasures. And it combines creation and destruction in such a way that those distinctions no longer exist. And this is a map that Robert Smithson wrote when he was creating his spiral jetty. Anyways, I wrote about the spiral jetty too, and via that piece articulated to myself the importance of geography and the pull of certain places. Also, the jetty, I don't know if anyone has seen it or knows, but it was built so you could see it, then the water rose, you couldn't see it, then the water sank, presumably forever, so you can see it, and now the rocks are all kind of slowly being sort of dissipated into the sand. Quickly, I'll just say Smithson chose the site for the spiral jetty after wandering around the shore of the Great Salt Lake looking for sites, because the site just felt right to him. And I can confirm that when I visited the spot, I too experienced an uncanniness. I experienced this same uncanniness when sailing on the Wannsee with my family in 2013. We caught sight at the far end of the lake of a strange topographical feature, a mountain that had on top of it what looked like the ruins of a religious temple. And this, I learned, was Teufelsberg. In the English language material about it, it's called a non-natural hill, constructed of the rubble left over from the World War II bombing of Berlin. And then on top of that, the U.S. erected a Cold War listening station. Only about a year ago did I learn the reason that the spot was chosen. Beneath the rubble is a Speer-designed military college, and it was easier to bury it than to destroy it. That was this. So I never stopped semi-obsessing about this place, and this is reason 2 I'm in Berlin. So I also never visited Teufelsberg until a few weeks ago. That's the day I went. For 10 years, it's exerted a gravitational tug on me for reasons I can't or maybe wish not to fully articulate now, but to list a few possibilities: erasure, burial, detritus, floor plans and buildings, and trash and remains, and listening. The listening is important, not just metaphorically, but ethically and politically. I'm thinking about listening as both a selfless and a selfish act, as an act of compassion, protection, and renewal and theft, especially when it happens from atop a fake mountain constructed of ruins over ruins over ruins that's been turned into a spontaneous outdoor art gallery. So now I want to look at Martin's words again, as I try to find words myself for what is difficult to articulate and highly sensitive and exists at the core of this project. Also because value is part of this project. The overlay is from Christie's, and I wanted to show in 2018, excuse me, what value the market placed on this work. So for the past few years, I've regularly found myself in conversations with people in their 70s and 80s about their fears of dying. Excuse me. And I'm speaking of waiting for one's so-called natural death to occur rather than the existential fear of no longer existing. Because of improved testing, surgical interventions, and medications, assuming a person in the U.S. has access to advanced or any health care, which is not the case for many Americans, so this fear I'm describing is mostly limited to people with such access. People are able to stay alive, but their quality of life can be drastically diminished. They are alive, but sometimes in terrible, untreatable pain, and sometimes that pain takes the form of unbearable loneliness. And so some older couples I both glancingly and more closely know have decided to outwit this situation by ordering drugs online and dying together, all in secret, because they cannot tell anyone what they're planning, since in these cases I'm referencing, there was no liability-free way to share this information. There is also, again, in part for liability reasons, but maybe also pressingly for cultural reasons, maybe more pressingly, no way to have these conversations, save in a coded manner. I had this coded conversation with my own parents recently. They are in perfect health, but my grandmother, who as of last Thursday was nearing 103 years old and has been waiting to die for 2 years now, she'd outlived her life and existed in what she indicated to be a sort of purgatory. My parents both announced to me they were not going to live out their final days this way. And I have no idea what in practice this means for them. I suspect they have no idea either. I didn't ask, I just agreed with them, which was possibly my way of giving them permission to do with the end of their lives what they wished. But it felt quite isolating for all of us to have no way to speak about how they might achieve what they wanted and how I might be involved, if at all. We could only speak of it by very actively not. So there are many, 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 many reasons that legally assisted death is complex and controversial, risky, upsetting, and ripe for exploitation. And I'm interested in this topic in part because often all I see are ways that the legal expansion of such liberties could be ethically abused or lead to unintended tragedy. And maybe, too, to focus on such a fix allows us to ignore the other cultural lapses, such as the disintegration of community that leads to loneliness and purposelessness and intensified negative health outcomes. But returning to questions of value and burden and also of one's own estate, in this case, if the estate is comprised of time, the possibly unwanted time that remains to a person like my grandmother, and how that time might be valued and reassessed and reallocated. One older, low quality of life couple that decided to end their lives together, they first wrote a letter and sent it to the local newspaper. Issues were raised about environmental concerns. They did not, for no reason, want to further impact the environment, as well as the medical industry's financial investment in keeping them alive. The value of their lives to other people, their value in the marketplace, suddenly seemed quantifiable in dollars, often many, many thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, paid to hospitals and insurance companies and care homes meant to give them more life, because the capitalist mindset implies or demands that the ability to purchase more life, no matter the quality, is freedom, rather than, in their case, and in the case of my grandmother, actually a form of extended captivity. And I know that policy is important in this villa. Policy is very important. But as a not now and probably never policy expert, I'm interested in how human ritual and death are inextricable, and how might new celebration and mourning practices develop around the type of desire my parents expressed. How might these imagined rituals more humanely inform policy? Okay, so there were a lot of other things I wanted to talk about tonight, but we don't have time. I'm going to quickly run through. One of the things I'm not going to talk about is the scam artist. you can ask me about him later. But he is technically how I first encountered the French actress. And this man is becoming a much greater part of this book than I anticipated, which is also why I don't want to talk about him. I first met him because we were scheming to make a clothing line together. And it was via this project that I did technically first encounter her. That is a copy of Bob Le Flambeur that I received when we went to pitch our idea to the Criterion Collection, because we were going to make a clothing line based off outfits that people wore in Criterion Collection movies. Anyways, this is the French actress. I would have ripped her off again, except that that project never came together. Also, I just think it's worth noting that I also have never opened this and have never watched it. Okay, this is a picture of my daughter from a few years back, and also one of the actress's press clippings. So I am thinking of having my daughter pose when she comes to visit me to recreate these clippings, because suddenly the idea of just reproducing these images in a book seemed like it was missing a crucial torque. And two, this relates to the natural and the non-natural, the line between fraudulence and release from old systems, and when and how a fake might be in response to falseness, and how it might develop a value that surpasses the real. Oh, for those of you who are interested, this is called The Wacker Affair. Sorry, we don't have time to get into that, but some other time. Okay, so to conclude, because I want to end on an uplifting note, while I've been writing, I've also been putting together this video. I have nothing to sell this time. Assembling it has become a ritual of return and a way to bridge the past and the present, and a way to honor and to miss my family, and to use these layers of experience to support a future without sacrificing or erasing what preceded it. So this video, which is 2 minutes and 44 seconds long, longer than usual, for me at least. The same rules applied for this video as for my book tour videos. Lots of playing around with only found objects. And this also, unfortunately, goes for the music. I'm only allowed to use the free music that comes with my software, my editing program. So bear that in mind. And the fake fur hat that I'll be wearing belonged to the French actress. And also my grandmother died on Thursday, 79 days shy of her 103rd birthday. And so this is a celebration of life in the form of silliness and play, pursued with the hope of eventually touching something quite serious. And it is for her. And that's all.
I'm going to ask just a few softball questions, really one or two. That's it. It's more important that you all get a chance to ask some questions. I have a million questions, but maybe one of the most obvious is just, you wrote 4 novels. Just the meta view is, I'm so curious as a nonfiction writer, what was that? Why did that jump happen to doing nonfiction? And was it a difficult leap?
Yeah. Well, it was super accidental and unintentional. And I mean, the actual reason, I suppose, would be, or the way that book came about is essentially I had what I told was an incurable chronic pain condition, and via that brief horrible experience, realized that one's personality is actually not a stable thing, and it's very dependent on the body that it's in. And so when I was misdiagnosed and I got better, I was suddenly really overwhelmed by this need to download this personality when it was still functional, I suppose, while the body could still enable it to thrive. And so I just started writing. I started what I had done when I was a kid, which was I kept a diary every day from like 8 to 13 or something like that. And so I just was like, I'm just going to start doing that again. And then that wasn't even ever intended to be a book. It was just supposed to be a document for my kids. And then, I don't know, I had way more fun writing that than I've ever had writing any so-called fiction. And so then I just...
You also said when we had spoken to you for this little movie for your fellow Spotlight that sometimes fiction writing, one gets low and it's sort of just you and your brain the whole time, but something about nonfiction you suggested actually puts you out into the world to actually go and find stuff.
Yeah. I mean, even just like walking around here when I was putting this thing together, you're suddenly like, oh, someone left their toy boat. Sorry, I'm taking it. You know what I mean? Like suddenly everything is sort of feels really available to become something else, in your immediate surroundings. And I mean, that's also true of fiction. I don't know. I felt stuck, I guess, a little bit, or I felt a little like I was still, I just didn't feel like I could play around as much in fiction as in nonfiction. And it could be because I am not trained in nonfiction. I don't know anything about nonfiction. I teach fiction at Columbia University, even though I stopped writing it over 10 years ago. But I could never teach nonfiction, and I would never wish to. I know you all were going to offer me a job at the end of this, teaching nonfiction.
We're going to start taking notes, actually.
No,
one actually does it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask one 10,000-foot question, and then I'll stop. In a culture obsessed with selfies and the self, how do you conceive of your books as doing something other than pointing back to the self? T.S. Eliot's quote is relevant. Poetry is not the expression of personality; it's the escape from personality. You have your writing or reading it over the years. I've always thought that you're able to strike this balance between humor and sincerity in a way that I can't find that frequently, and you're enormously funny. So this, you're constantly pointing away from yourself, but you're also writing about your life, and I think that's an interesting balance.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say about fiction and the self. I will say that as I have been making these videos, and then also this idea of kind of like faking those press clippings with my daughter, I'm like, oh, am I actually now going to be writing a novel that I didn't know I was writing? Like, I think I'm fictionalizing myself ever more. So it could be that is the way, like making myself into a character is how I'm going to get back into fiction. But I don't want to say that out loud because then it won't happen. You know what I mean? So I can't have discovered that because it won't come true. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I just see it's not about the self. The self is the through, right? I don't know. You go through the self. Like the self is just this, useful little portal that you can sort of welcome people through. Yeah, I actually didn't include, and I should have because it makes me laugh so hard. I don't know why. Also because we've talked about rabbit holes a lot here. So I actually went, and when I gave a version, actually it wasn't even anything like this. When I once upon a time tried to give a talk, and I was going to talk about rabbit holes, and I assumed that I was going to Google rabbit holes, and I was going to come up with some like Escher-y looking kind of like, right? But a rabbit hole is just it's just a hole in the ground, you know. And I mean, there was actually something so amazing about it. It looked kind of like a grave or like a birth canal, or I don't know, but it just didn't look like anything all that exciting. It just really was just a hole, you know? And so, I don't know, I guess that's sort of the deceptiveness of the use of the self, maybe, is that it just looks like, oh, it's just like a hole in the ground. But then, you know, it does actually, yeah.
All right, and with that, on that note, please, if you have questions. There's a microphone. Please just wave your hand up or raise your hand as it's known, and the microphone will find you. Just please say your name, and so we can, the people on Zoom can hear us. And if you're on Zoom, please just type your questions into the chat. Once in a lifetime chance here.
Michael Giesen, thank you for the talk. I'm probably not the only person who looked at the announcement of the talk on the website and was probably deceived by this beautiful photograph, I presume, of the Maine coast somewhere, which could have come out of a local chamber of commerce. And so I was just wondering, was that a trick played on us? And did you have a part in it?
Yes. This is the fiction, as I'm saying. I actually haven't seen that. Is it a nice picture of the coast? It is? Wait, but I don't know. I'm sorry. Did you not think that Maine was really beautiful? No? Okay.
Well, there was Maine in like 31% of that presentation.
Yes, there was some Maine. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like even the description, I mean, it's not even called altitude sickness anymore. Like this is all just a scam, my friends. But I think that it is a very in-process situation. And I think what becomes really difficult about all of this is, how do I say this exactly? How to, like, the stuff that I am interested in is really quite serious, and maybe I'm able to interact with it in a certain way, but I'm not a journalist. And there is a book about what I'm writing about to be written, but I can't write that book, or maybe I don't want to write that book. And so I think the constant balance and the line to walk, which is maybe the false advertising that you're pointing out, is that, you know, I have to sort of speak about it in this kind of very intentional way, like this is what I'm interested in. But then it could really be in the end that how it gets metabolized by the final book will be, well, again, getting back to that kind of Agnes Martin triangle, right? It could just be way at the bottom and you're not going to actually be seeing it. You're just going to kind of feel it as a stabilizing force. Anyways, I'm sorry.
Anyone else in the back?
Oh, thank you. Will you do it? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so speaking of scams,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about the scam artist?
Oh, it's just, I mean, honestly, I guess I will just say that Ilya and Anna and the librarians here, we've been having a lot of fun chasing down all of the articles about this person who has many different names. And also, actually, I'm going to put this out to everybody here. So I am looking for a movie called Process that was at the Berlinale in 2004. And there is no trace of this movie anywhere, any place. So if anyone has any contacts with anyone at the Berlinale, I'm sure no one here does. No one even went to the Berlinale. I mean, I'm just putting that out there. I'm looking for that film. Thank you.
There was a question. Raise your hand, please. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you for the talk. My name is Omer. I'm going to ask a question which, if I were on stage, would immensely annoy me. So please,
Okay.
please
Oh,
forgive me.
yay.
I'm wondering about the identity of the French actress.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm reading Naomi Klein's book Doppelganger.
Oh, yeah.
And does her identity matter? Does her person matter? Does her life matter? Is it, you talked about holes in the body as this kind of channel or a rabbit hole. Does she matter?
So that is a really interesting question, and I would answer that differently probably every year in the last 10 years that I've been buying her stuff. One of the things I would say maybe that is a prevailing, I don't know, again, if we're just going to talk about rules, but this isn't even a rule. This is just like how I feel and what I want. I don't ever want to hurt anyone's feelings, and I don't ever want to take ownership of something that doesn't belong to me. And so that obviously is pretty tricky given what I'm up to here. I also am in touch with the daughter, and we have never had a completely, I guess, straightforward conversation about what I would do or not do, what she would want or not want. And then also I have this strange resistance to knowing too much. Again, I guess that's a theme here. So at one point she offered to send me her mother's letters. And I don't know that I want them, you know? I don't know if I want them. And I do wonder about how like if I start to, because I think what I'm thinking about as well is this kind of like mother-daughter thing, right? Like the daughter is selling the mother's things. I am using my daughter in these projects that make me money, so much money. And so, right, like in a strange way, it's like between me and the daughter kind of. And like that's the relationship that I think I need to kind of tease out a little bit. At the same time, yeah, I mean, I think the fact that I felt weird about wearing this tonight. You know what I mean? Like I do. I feel weird. But I think that fear or that trepidation that I have, that feels like a hopefully productive edge to be walking along. Am I a monster? I don't know. Do you think I'm a monster? Yes or no?
I have a germane question about making a living from Zoom from anonymous attendee. Thank you, Heidi. Your talk was amazing. Spelled out very long. Fascinating. My question is, how does one find the time to do what you do, all the exploration with video and language and erasure, and still find a way to make a living? How do you make it possible?
Well, I'm not making a living right now. So I am here not working. No, it's hard. It's definitely really hard. But I think it's less about hours in the day, and I think it's more just about clean air in the brain, you know what I mean? And so that is why, I mean, honestly, I cannot say what a gift it has been to be here. I mean, beyond. And I, obviously I cried on the podium. I cry every day here because I'm so grateful to be here. I mean, I'm serious. I just don't have this, like, just this twang in my head. You know what I mean? So I guess my answer to that question is, it's hard.
It's hard, Zoom watcher.
I mean, thank God for things like this that actually allow you to take a break, you know?
Other questions? There were a bunch of hands that went up before I read the Zoom. Okay, right here. Thank you, Hannah.
Was that me?
Yeah. Correct, yes, with the glasses, yep.
There's so many questions that I have about the problem of buying the objects and not wanting the letters. I mean, there are loads of questions. It's really fascinating. But I think that there's something inherent in thrifting, what we call thrifting, or collecting clothing from thrift shops, which relies upon the anonymity of the piece of clothing. So it's really fascinating when you say you don't want the letters, because you would then know you'd be too close to this woman. But it seems as though by knowing the daughter, you're already a little too close to her which I suppose depends on what you want to do
Yeah.
with it.
And I think maybe again it's that sort of like unopened pregnancy dress, right? I mean, I think that it's there, and I guess my response wasn't like, yeah, send them, you know what I mean? Like I had a moment of like, oh, maybe I need to just think about just how does that change the flow of where you're headed, you know what I mean? Because once you read those things, you've read them.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's funny you should say that because I was married before the fellow that I married, the literal fellow who was here, and and we bought a used wedding ring. And he joked when he gave it to me. He's like, I bet this person died in a skydiving accident. And there was this sort of interesting way that like buying a used wedding ring is tricky. You know what I mean? And it didn't work out. And I don't know that.
I have a lot more questions to ask you, but I'll ask you them. I'm going to hand this to my husband.
I'm gonna steal the mic for a second,
Okay.
Heidi. I love the talk, and
Thank you.
I love that you skate out to the thinnest of ice and are going where very few writers, fiction writers, journalists, nonfiction, whatever generic category we're going to use for the kind of writing you're doing. It's really unusual, and I don't know anybody else doing anything like it, which is leading to the first of my two questions. The first question is, how do you know at what point that what you're doing is right and clicks into place for you as something that's correct?
Yeah. You mean as you're not like morally correct?
No, just
Yeah.
writerly correct.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, okay. Interesting that you should ask that question. So again, when I wrote 2 books ago, The Folded Clock, I don't know. I just like opened up this. What I would do is every day I'd write today and that was the beginning of everything, and that is all I needed, and that just unlocked everything I needed to get unlocked, right? So then I was like, oh, okay. So you need to always find whatever that is. What is that thing? You know. But that's really, really, really hard to find, and I may not ever find it again for the rest of my life. Right? No, I'm serious. I mean, I really might not. And so then, but what I can take from it is that I know what that feels like, right? It's almost like that's why I shouldn't have married my first husband, because I knew what love felt like, and it wasn't the same, and we shouldn't have gotten married, right? So I know what, and he would agree with me, and he's not watching this anyways, but I'm just saying. Right? But I mean, I think that sense of what it felt like, I was like, okay, I know that feeling. And so for so many reasons that aren't worth getting into, the book I wrote afterwards, I got into a huge twist. It was supposed to be one thing, then it had to be something else. There were lots of editors involved. It was like a total nightmare. And so I was like, okay, well, what can I now learn from those 2 experiences together? And I think what it is, so I've been thinking about, as I've been writing this book here, it's almost like I don't lay the brick unless I know it is the right brick and it's the absolute right place for that brick to go. And if I don't know that, then I don't move forward. And I did, for example, 2 weeks ago, I laid a brick down, and then I woke up in the morning, I was like, wrong brick. And I took it out, you know?
Second question was, can I have my rubber duck back?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Heidi, for the wonderful talk and the video. I loved it. I've been thinking about things in relationship to things and stories and memory, and so when you showed the sweater of the actress, which was the first thing. I was thinking whether one can think about that in terms of the souvenir, but not a souvenir of a trip you made, but a souvenir of a life that you know very little about, maybe a little more now, but that you try to also incorporate. And so that I was thinking that was also interesting about the, distinction between fiction and nonfiction as a way where the souvenir always comes with a story, or the souvenir is only complete with the story of where it came from. So, so I was wondering whether maybe the nonfiction effort of that always needs some fictional dimension of creating the story of that, but also incorporating it into your own life, even owning it in the sense of wearing it and incorporating it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe this is also why I feel like this is veering in a fictional direction, or maybe it really is just about kind of a little bit more overtly owning how fictional nonfiction often is, and it is about creating those stories. Like it's like a souvenir, your memoir, you know what I mean? Like all of it is this sort of recreated, partially true, partially narrativized, object, So, yeah.
One more question. Ooh. We're getting down to the wire. Heidi's determined 1 hour. Mm-hmm. Sarah?
Hi, thank you so much for your talk and for your work. I'm wondering if you can share with us some of your thoughts on how this current project around the French actresses' things and some of what you talked about with your own family connects to how you think about time. And I'm asking that because I think you so beautifully capture the slipperiness and the stretchiness of time in The Folded Clock. And you also, in that book, so beautifully exert control over time. And so I'd love to hear how you think about some of these questions around end of life and longevity and the things that survive us in relation to time. Thanks.
I mean, I guess the first thing that comes to mind when you mention time, and if I think about like in The Folded Clock, like what time meant and how time felt like this kind of exciting, slippery eel that you were kind of trying to get a hold of. I think what is really kind of shocking if you are exiting that period of your life where you've had children, to realize how much time you suddenly have. And suddenly time doesn't feel very slippery. It feels, I don't know, it kind of feels a little bit scary, actually. And so I feel like my relationship to time has really changed. And I guess also just thinking about my grandmother and going to visit her and just seeing how like there was like time was just killing her, except not, So I think I feel about time the way I feel about ghosts, which is I didn't believe in ghosts. Or I thought they were cute and funny, and I sort of, I don't know, whatever. I was like, ooh, a ghost. Until I actually encountered a ghost, and it messed me up. And then when I went into spaces that felt like there might be something in there, it was like having been bit by a dog and then being scared of dogs. So I kind of feel that way about time all of a sudden. That's not really an answer to your question, but...
All right, and to stick to your schedule,
okay.
I'm going to ask for us to say thank you and applause.
Okay. All right, thank you.